I do want to introduce Chuck, Chuck Hodel. Hopefully, I said that correctly. He's going to be talking about dynamic design. Are you challenge ready? And I think he's accompanied by Deborah Day here as well. That's all I have from my end. The floor is now you guys. There you go.
All right. Well, thank you, Brody. See if I can manage to make this work without too much chagrin. I'd like to welcome everyone to our session. Very excited to have everybody here. It's been a terrific conference so far, and I think we've saved the best for last. Um, so I would like to tell you a little bit about our guest, Dr. Chuck Hodel. He's a professor at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and director of Learning Technology and Performance Master's Program, and a very prolific author. He's written some very well-known books, ISD from the Ground Up, which is in its fourth edition, SMEs from the Ground Up, which is how Chuck and I actually met and have gotten together on some of our discussions here. A lot of articles and papers that he's done. Um, the Society for Training Development info lines and in the magazine, and in the he's written the handbook for training development. He's a contributor to that, and he's just recently, I think about 2 or 3 weeks ago, published a brand new textbook, which is really terrific. I've just gotten into my copy of it, called Introduction to Instructional Systems Design Theory and Practice. It's a great basic book for anybody who is either really familiar or not so familiar with the industry. So I would highly recommend that. And he's also got his own YouTube channel, ISD from the Ground Up, and does some great interviews with people who have experience in ISD and, interestingly, how they've come to ISD. There's never a real clear, straight path, at least not for most of us. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Chuck Hodel.
Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you might be. And I see Deborah. You should just take this. This will be perfect. Um, we're going to have some fun today. Thank you both, Brody and Deborah, for the great introductions. Very nice. Greatly appreciated. I hope I meet that guy someday. It'd be a wonderful event. Dynamic design. Gosh, what is dynamic design? And when you think about it, dynamic design is everything that we do every day. Dynamic design is how we talk to people, how we design courses, how we put together programs, all of the things that we do. And the incredible part of instructional design and being a designer, a subject matter expert, or a manager of the process is the reliance on us to do things that are incredible every day. And to be able to do that, we have to be dynamic. We have to be able to change as things change. We have to think about the world in a little different way. We have to think about systems. We have to think about all of the things that are taking place in our environment. So, dynamic by definition is something in constant change. And I don't think there's any doubt that our worlds are constantly changing, sometimes very importantly and very quickly, as we saw over the last 18 months, but sometimes more subtly, and I'd say more often subtly. But then you look at dynamics and you look at a dynamic person. And who is a dynamic person? It's someone who is full of energy and got lots of attitude and goes out and does great things. And so you think about it from that perspective and gee, this dynamic thing, what is it all about? And I think one of the things that spawns us to be dynamic is chaos. I love chaos theory. I love talking about it. I love people getting the notion of how this works in instructional design and large programs. And so chaos theory demands that we look at every aspect of everything we do. So the dynamism of that is there is nothing unrelated in our worlds. The things that seem unrelated will raise their heads later, or the nexus will become apparent. But at some point, all of these things, they're all related. So if you've studied chaos theory or you've never heard of it, essentially what we're saying is there is no abstract model of the universe that stays in one place. And there's no abstract model of instructional design or the things that we do as subject matter experts or instructional designers that are always constant. So one of the things that Edward Lorenz out of MIT, who was really the father of this, used to say, he would talk about the butterfly effect. And the notion was in meteorology that if butterflies all flap their wings at the same time, they could change the weather. And in that case, it would be a hurricane because that's the things he was studying. So this all came from the notion that there could be models for things. And this is where we get the hurricane models and storm models now. But what they found was that if the data wasn't absolutely accurate and timely, that the models staled very quickly and weren't accurate. So when you look at things in our world, you have to look at what changes from day to day and sometimes from hour to hour. So we get to be dynamic by looking at all these things in our world. And the one thing that we have to acknowledge and recognize is entropy. And entropy, as we all know, is this notion that nothing gets better, it always gets worse. So the example is, if you have a child and their room is a mess, it's never going to fix itself. Somebody's going to have to go in and make that room cleaned up and fixed up and tidy. So entropy in instructional design in our world is this notion that if we stay stagnant, if we stay stale, and we don't do all these wonderful things, then eventually it's going to fall apart. It's only going to get worse. There's no way it's going to get better. And that relates to our product, to our process, to our people, everything else that we're relating here to this discussion of dynamicity. So, we're about systems. Instructional design is systems. Everything's related to everything else. Everything can be chaos. And if we're not prepared for change, if we haven't planned for change, if we haven't planned for the unexpected, then what we're going to get is what we deserve, and that's whatever happens. And you don't have to look any farther than Surf City down in Florida overnight, where you lose a 12-story apartment building. And the emergency responders had to have a plan to go in there and rescue and do the best they could with that. And can you imagine a situation like that if there wasn't a plan and there wasn't training and there wasn't a way to look at this specific situation and be able to accept those challenges and meet them and do the best you could with what you're given? So take that out of that context and put it in our context. These are things we need to do too. We need to plan for things like pandemics and technology that doesn't work and folks that don't show up. And can we really let our courses sit? Can we not think about half-life of courses and data? How long is something really reactive? And how long can we look at it and say, okay, we know that's still relevant. That data is still good. Sometimes it's a half an hour. Sometimes it's 5 minutes. Sometimes it's a year. But these are the things we have to plan for. This is how we have to be dynamic. This is how we have to think about our universe and all these little pieces that all go together. So when you think about it, as a designer, as a subject matter expert, as a manager of the process, you have to be ready for any eventuality. So that's a little background. And what I like to do is have conversations. You'll never hear me lecture. That was a long lecture for me. I don't like to do that. I like to have conversations. And I know there's questions out there. I know that Deborah will be looking for them in the chat. And I think there's some other questions that have been brought forward before we got started. So let's have a conversation. Let's talk about dynamic instructional design. Let's talk about subject matter experts and our relationships with them. Let's talk about process, product, all the other things that are going on in our world. And let's have that conversation.
So Chuck, I've got one of our first questions is, as you've mentioned, there is this potential for anything, for a pandemic to happen. So in that particular instance, we've had a lot of fast turnaround virtual developments where the concern is getting the product out the door, not necessarily whether ISD is involved or how. So in that sort of situation, how do you provide any consistency in your products and to your clients? We, as you are saying, we need to be flexible. It's a dynamic environment, yet we need to have a certain level of quality and expertise that we actually put out there. How do you do that in the middle of chaos?
Well, in the middle of chaos, you do the best you can, right? You put forth the product that as best you can, and you go along later and improve it and change it and do what you need to do down the line. And it's not only in situations of chaos or immediacy that you find this. There are many times that these are just organizational issues that are developed anyway, and they just become more acute when you have a crisis or you have to do something. So what I always tell designers, and the way I practice, is I always come up with a plan. Whether that plan is implemented, whether it's accepted, whether it's accepted later when what they've done doesn't work, however you get to this, you have to have that blueprint. You have to have that plan. So I was always brought up to believe that if you have done your best and you've come up with a design plan or an approach and put all this information and documented it in some manner, and we call it a design plan, others call it different things, but if you have this there, then you have this blueprint. And if something happens later, it doesn't work the way people intended, then you have a place to start. The other part of it is if people don't accept what you're trying to do and go ahead and do something else of lower quality or lower survivability in terms of being able to measure mastery and do the other things that we want to do, then you have documentation to say, this is what we suggested. This is what our best advice was on this. And the fact that you didn't follow it, I mean, that was your choice. I'm not going to go into that discussion, but here's what we suggested. And since you didn't do that, here are the things that happened. So let's go back and look at it and see if we can't fix it. But I think in the immediacy of all this, we're just going to have to do the best we can. Then we go back and we fine tune and we make things better. Because I never think anything's done anyway. I mean, the most you ever get anything completed is 90%. And it's certainly been true in my case. So the challenges that people have gone through lately are just phenomenal. They've done incredible work. Miracles have happened every minute of every day with groups around the world dealing with all this. So I guess some of it's to be expected, but my best advice is always have a plan that you have documented that you can say, this was our suggestion. This is what we thought was best for this.
Okay. We've got a question in the chat. It says, to go back to your structure collapse analogy, in addition to the training, the USAR teams have pre-plans and a general approach to structure collapse, so they are never starting from zero. Is that something that you would recommend, as you have said, that there's always a plan, even if potentially the client hasn't asked for one?
Something that I recommend designers do, and some people think that this is crazy, but I always have groups, whether it be clients, whether it be designers, I've even done it with learners and managers, is I do what is the worst thing that can happen scenario analysis. So worst case scenario, let's put them up on the whiteboard. Let's talk about what can go wrong. Are there things that we can control? Are there things that we can change? How are we going to respond to these things? And I think everyone has to have that information. I think if you're working at any scale, if you're doing a single course that's an hour long, you're not going to do this. But if you're putting together a program that has potential to be tens, 20s, hundreds of courses across a program for a certification or some validity model at the end, then I think you have to look at what are the things that can go wrong. And I think that's how you generate your plan. Okay, here's what we see is the worst things, the worst scenarios, and here's how we're going to think about those things. And should they happen, this is where we're going to start to try to address them.
Okay. One of the other questions, we've had a lot of interest around this, is how do you recommend keeping learners engaged and active in any format? So personally, I've had the opportunity to take instructor-led training, which is a method that I'm used to, and to try and do it online. And it is a totally different world. So
Yep.
we, I think, have had technology help us out, but I also think we lose the focus on instructional design because of the technology. We're so more concerned about what I call whiz bang than we are.
Mm-hmm.
We lose the theory, the underpinning, and the learning. So what are your thoughts about how to sort of keep people engaged no matter what when we're thrown into this?
Well, two questions I hear. One is learner engagement, and the other one is what do you do with technology? So learner engagement, you have to start with the notion that learners want to be engaged. And the sad reality of most of the professional design world is most training is mandated. Most courses are mandated. 70% or better, depending on the organization, but in general, 70%. So already you have a learner that knows they have no choice. And they're going to be there, they're going to participate. Whoever has decided that's going to be the case, whether it's part of learning a new skill, a new process, inboarding, whatever you're doing, safety and health, it's mandated. So engagement has to be looked at from the from the filter of, okay, how do we make this something that we accept the fact that perhaps people don't want to be there or that they're not engaged even before they get there, and try to turn that into a situation where you community. And whether you do this online or in the classroom, you still have to come to that point of realization where, okay, I've got to be here for today, or I've got to be here for an hour as a learner. And let's try to make the best of this situation. So there are many times, I think, as a designer, talking about instructional design skills, that you have to recognize this and acknowledge it with learners. So in your introduction, when you're going through objectives or however you design your courses, it's okay to say, we're in this together. We got to get through this. We understand it's probably not the place that you want to be all day. And it's not the thing that you want to be doing right now, this morning or this afternoon or whenever. But let's work together to make this something that can be a success. And let's acknowledge that we're here because we have to be here and we need to be here. And I found that to be very successful. The only time I didn't find that to be successful is when I was designing a course for driving school, when the judge told you if you didn't go on Saturday morning and spend 4 hours there, the points are going to cost you your license. So, I never could motivate that population for some reason. Maybe somebody out there can put in the chat how they would do it. But I think that you have to acknowledge with adults especially, okay, here's the situation. Let's not pretend it's something else, and let's do this for all of us. And the engagement factor is, you go back to adult learning principles. Okay, it needs to be something relevant to them. You need to acknowledge their knowledge and experience. You need to not waste their time to whatever degree you have any control over that, and engage them at every level. So speaking to adults in lecture, there are times when that works, but I'd say most of the time it's less effective than other options that you might have. So let's jump on to the online portion of things. And one thing that I found, and I've been designing online courses, I don't even say how long, but I'll say it's over 30 years. Back to the time when the first PC was introduced and, Apple IIs and IIes came out. We were thinking about online learning. And at that point, we did it with email, which was also a novelty at that point. So you may remember the Source and CompuServe and other places. And we used those to distribute. It was distributed learning as opposed to what we now know as online. But as it's evolved, we've found that we can do just about everything online that we could do in a classroom. You just have to be clever about it and engage people in different ways. And the other thing that you have to recognize with online is there are generational differences in terms of people's ability to use the technology, their willingness to use the technology. And you have to factor all of those things in too. And I found from my classes just in graduate school, which I think is relevant here, there was always this notion that, okay, online, you're not going to get to know your students. You're not going to get as good a work out of them. They're going to feel a different relationship with you than what they would in the classroom. And I found that for the most part to be completely incorrect. The studies I did with my students, and it's thousands of students, is that, first of all, I knew them better as an individual when they were online than I did when they were sitting in a classroom talking about populations. The second thing I found was the work was almost exponentially better because there was an expectation, I think, on the learner's part that my relationship with this instructor is not going to get me a grade. I have to do the work, I have to perform. And I think those things are important. So the notion that I wouldn't know them was incorrect. The notion that I wouldn't get as good a work was incorrect. And I'm somebody that uses Gagne's 9 events of instruction for lesson plans in a classroom setting. So one-on-one, large groups facilitated by someone else. I use the 9 events. So we go through it. You do the same things. I can do the 9 events online. I can do the nine events on Twitter. I haven't tried TikTok yet because I'm not sure I'm TikTok eligible. But you can do instructional design online. You can do all of it. The mastery sometimes is a challenge. There are issues when there's complexity and performance that you want to look at for mastery, but there's ways around that. People are very clever now about how to do that. So I would say that a good designer can come up with a course online that's every bit comparable to what they could do in the classroom. And I think that you'll find overall that mastery will be higher.
I think that's excellent advice. I think there's another part to that, and that is the competence or the ability of your instructor as well. I think the presenter,
Yeah, well, there's always
it
that.
makes a difference. And so as a part of our role as instructional designers is to prepare our instructors, and because we're really a support function. We can drive and we can guide, but if
You
you
can't take
hand
the
this
wheel.
magnificent baby to someone who doesn't know how to change the diaper, I think you have a problem. So
Well,
at least that's
so
been my
let me add
experience.
this to that because I think that's an important point. When I was talking about design plans earlier, how you put together this blueprint for what you want to do and share that and nurture it and do all the things you do. One of the components of a design plan that I use is prerequisites. Try saying that 3 times. Prerequisites for instructors and facilitators. So there are organizations where there's a teach team and you get the same people for every course and you can't really do that much about it. But there's this notion that as a designer, I need to go to that next level. So when I put together a course, I'm also going to put together who ought to teach it. And I don't mean individually. Don't name them. You should never design a course for an individual because that will always be a disaster. But you should be able to define who's going to teach that course. You can do it by experience. You can do it by facilitation skills. You can do it subject matter expertise. Whatever you decide are the components of this instruction that you want them to be able to master and demonstrate for you to be able to facilitate. And online, it's, can you handle a learning management system? Can you get into Blackboard and do what you need to do to be able to do that? And I don't think those are unreasonable things. And what we found is that once we set prerequisites, then we have an opportunity to work with potential facilitators to get them where they need to be. So sometimes that's the notion of, okay, let's work on your facilitation skills. Let's make you a better facilitator. Let's talk about how you invite learners in, whether you're online or in the classroom. Let's get you away from PowerPoint mania and get you into actually having conversations with learners. Let's make sure you follow the script. If it's a very detailed thing that ends up in some certification that will be tested for mastery, here are the things you have to cover, but let's talk about the gray areas on the sides. So I think to all of you that are designers, you need to really think about who you want to facilitate your courses. Now, if you have no control over it, it's just like everything else. You put it in your design plan, you hope for the best. But I think you'd be surprised at how often you can move a facilitator or team of facilitators to a different level based on your expectations of them. Because many times they think they just go in and do their magic and leave, and we're all just silent with gratitude. and, the great teacher theory, don't get me started on that. I don't think we have teachers. I think we have facilitators. I think it's our role to move people from one place to the next, not be something else. But that's Chuck's view. But I think as a designer, you got to think about this. Okay, let's come up with some standards for what we expect. And then you got a place to go. Then you can help people be better facilitators and help them work with groups better and help them learn the online learning management systems and all the bells and whistles that the students never see that they can manipulate and program and do what they want to with. So I don't know if that gets to that in a specific way, but I think it's one of those very advanced design things you need to do. Specify who's going to teach and what you expect of them.
Yeah, thanks. 2 questions. There's one in the chat that matches one that we've got that we had from before. There's the complaint is no time for analysis or buy-in from clients who say analysis isn't required.
Yeah,
but
every
then
client.
to take all clients to take a course from classroom to online, was the lesson plan taken back to the analysis stage and rethought to make it work as effectively, or how is that approached?
Well, um, I don't know what it is about analysis, but it seems like things that aren't products are not supported at the same level. Internal, external clients, or whoever you're working with. That's just a design thing. It's what all instructional designers have to deal with. It, very few people really want to do the analysis. So I've come up with something I call NOP analysis, NOP. And it's an analysis that you can do informally. You can do it in 30 minutes or 15 minutes on a napkin. And it's needs, objectives, and populations. And if you can determine the need, satisfy yourself that you can fix it. That's the first question in instructional design. Can you actually facilitate something that changes the problem, gets us to a solution? So think about need, think about objectives. Okay, write some informal objectives. Make sure that you can demonstrate how people are going to get to mastery and the path that that'll take. And then look at your population. Okay, where are they in terms of the stuff that you want them to have for prerequisites, and what's the potential for them to reach mastery? And if you can't get paid for it, and you can't even put it in your time card or figure it out in any other way, do a NOP. Just do a very quick analysis for what you're going to do, and then that will move you to the 3 basic things that you have to know, regardless of whether you get paid for it or given the time to do it. So that's kind of an answer to that. But moving lesson plans, that migrating stuff is difficult to do in one sense, but I found it's more difficult to get facilitators to be okay with migrating it than it is to actually technically do the work of migrating the content. And you get that buy-in by giving them the freedom to do clever things in their courses and do other things. But it's a very common issue.
Okay, we've got another question in the chat that's based on theory. How do you maintain buy-in from management when you need to modify your design approach from the traditional ADDIE model to better suit the challenge?
I think this is where you get into this whole notion of trust. One of the things that I try to establish with people making decisions, whether they're managers or clients or what have you, is that you need to let us be instructional designers. You need to be able to trust in our expertise. Instructional design is a science. There's so many scientific elements to it that I'm not going to try to list them. But we become instructional designers through a process of learning and experience and other things. And just like any other profession, at some point you have to be able to trust us to do what we do best. And if it doesn't work the way we say it will, or if it doesn't do what you want it to do, then we have that conversation. But many times from my experience, it really was about just letting people do what you do best and getting them to buy into you as a professional and being able to deliver the things that you say you'll deliver. And all of us went through this with bosses and managers and clients. This is just like analysis. This is one of the hats that we have to wear, is this trust us hat. Give us a chance. Let us do what we do best. And over time, I found that works. You're always going to have people that won't. There's no absolutes in anything. But I think the more that you present yourself as a professional and have a history of being able to deliver things, I think you'll find that that'll diminish.
Okay. The follow-on question to that is, how do you get management to continue to trust you? So once you've earned that trust.
Yeah, what is trust? Okay. I think trust, especially in a field like instructional design, let's be honest, nobody knows what instructional design is. You say you work in ISD outside of our little cloud that follows us around in our work world, and nobody has any idea what we're talking about. My family has no idea what I do. It's one of these things. So you think about it, and you take that discussion out to everybody else in our world that we work with professionally. And so, why would a manager know what ISD is, or why would they trust you? And one thing that I've done, especially in large groups, so when I'm working with a board on a project, let's say they've got a gazillion-dollar project and there's a board and it's labor and management and sometimes political and whatever else. And the first thing they do is introduce me, and they start to tear flesh off of my body, saying I don't have any idea what I'm talking about. Nobody's ever heard of this ISD stuff. And it just became a regular event with me to be insulted in board meetings. I used to kind of keep notes on it about how bad it was at some of them. And what I found to be very useful after having this process repeated a number of times was I started explaining to them what instructional design is. So I would give them a boot camp on what it is we do and what we offer and what we perform and the product that we produce and why it's a credible product. And I found that as people begin to understand what it is we do and take all the words we use and turn them into real life and in their life and their environment, they start to appreciate that this really is something. And this is one of the things I've taken on as a crusade, is to make instructional design and ISD more visible, promoting the fact that it is a science, which it is a science. You can't argue that. But I think we have to educate. And the more education we can give to boards and bosses and everybody else, the more they're going to say, you know what, that starts to make sense. And the more people demand competency and mastery, the more they're going to turn to you, because anything that's not done professionally and done well and designed well is not going to perform at a level that most people want to pay for. Let's be honest about it. So get them to understand what you do, teach them the process, whether it's Addie or Sam or however you decide you're going to address something, but educate people. Don't isolate them. Make them part of your family. Um, in the SME book, I always recommend that everybody go to ISD boot camp. In fact, I put an outline of a 4-hour course in there so that people can look at that and say, if I can just get 4 hours of all these people's time and let me go through what it is we do and show them examples of it, I think they're going to be okay with us after time.
Well, we can do that, and then we can give them the link to your YouTube channel because
Well,
you can do some
yeah.
videos on that, and that would be awesome to help us
There's
all
lots of
out.
videos on there, but I mean, it's all to the point of I don't think people understand what we do, and you can't appreciate something that you don't understand. Let's be honest.
There's also the need to want to understand it. I think there's also
Well,
that.
you know, and this goes back to subject matter experts, and we call them sentinel SMEs, or people that get into positions because of their long, successful history at an organization or doing what they do. And sometimes you got to win them over. Let's be honest. They've been through it all. They've seen it all. You have to win their trust and their respect. I'm okay with that. I'm fine with that. Let's go.
There's another question in the chat that sort of relates to this. What are your thoughts on how instructional design and learner engagement will evolve as millennials and Gen Z become the leaders and managers of our world? Do you see a transition
Oh,
there?
generational differences. I do a whole day's class on generational differences in learning and how different groups address learning and what they're comfortable with and not comfortable with. And I think it'll evolve like anything else, but it won't evolve the way that you think. I don't think the obvious is the way this is going to go. And I think one thing we've learned in the last 18 months, and certainly in the last 4 or 5 years, is that the classroom is no longer the standard for education or training. That's going to evolve. And you look at the fact that 30 to 40% of people that were working remotely no longer want to come into an office. And you look at all the other things that show that people are quite happy not clustering together for whatever reason. Then you start to look again at our chaos, right? Go back to chaos theory. What are all these parts that start to connect? And the thing that I start to see, and maybe you do, is this notion that people want to be independent. They want to have more management of their time. They want to have the ability to be able to perform within an environment that they feel comfortable with. And all of this plays directly into what we do as instructional designers because we now need to think about how do we put these things together in a way that does not reflect or mirror the traditional classroom that people, frankly, are not, for the most part, happy with. Some people find comfort in them. I mean, I still like to teach in the classroom, but I haven't taught in the classroom at graduate level for almost 10 years. Our program's been online for a long time. And I think what's going to change is the things that are very subtle. So you look at the new technology and the younger generations, whatever you want to call them, millennials or Zs or 10,000 different names we give them. But let's look at the 30 and unders. Okay, they don't know a time when there wasn't a smartphone. They don't know a time when there wasn't Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and everything else. And God help us, TikTok. And I have a TikTok thing. And this whole notion of, okay, so they're perfectly comfortable with this as a form of communication. But the interesting thing is, the research shows that they don't necessarily want to use it for learning because then you dilute their ability to use their social network in the way that they want to, with the freedom to use it at any time and any place with anybody. And now you're saying, oh, I'm going to send you a class on this or that, and I'm going to use Instagram and Twitter and all these other things to feed you information. And they start, and the research shows that they're not buying into it in the same way. So what's next?
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. You think, oh yeah, they'd love to have a course. No, they don't. I mean, certainly not all of them. But what you have is a barrier. You got a resistance level that you're going to have to overcome. So the thing that I think people should think about in terms of design is you have to now break up every training or every education package into what I call packets. And some of these packets are a minute. Some of them are 5 minutes. Some of them are 10 minutes. But instead of thinking about a package or a course is an hour or 4 hours or 8 hours, you think about it as 60 1-minute packets or however you want to divide them. And once you start to design that way, what you get is the ability to migrate the stuff any way you want to migrate it. So, okay, I only have a half hour. I only have 15 minutes to spend on this. I will take these 5 chunks and I will study those. And then tonight I'll get to the other chunks and I'll do whatever. So packaging is breaking down any content area into its smallest divisible part and then sandwiching those back together however best you can to come up with digital training or however you want to look at distributed learning. And I think once you start to think differently about content, then you look at the world and it's like, okay, I can make this work in any environment. So Neuralink, let's say that Elon embeds us all with chips. It's just going to be delivered, right? It's okay, or you're delivered in packets. Because if any of you are on here, electrical engineers or RF engineers or anything else, which some of you are, you already know packaging is how cell phones work and how light guide works and all these other things. Everything's broken into little pieces so you can get 10,000 conversations where you used to have one on a pair of copper. So that's what we have to think about too in terms of design. Yeah, let's break this stuff up. I got to break us down into the smallest chunk of content that I can find, and I'm going to arrange these in a way that I can distribute these in a way that works best for my population. So that's a long answer to that question, but I think it really does require us as designers to get out of our lane a little bit and look at what's going on in the real world and to make assumptions about generations I found to be foolhardy because I have people just engaged in their 70s online as I have 20-year-olds.
Very, very interesting. It's almost as though you're using sort of a connectivist theory to fool people into learning. And so this isn't really a training course. It's just little bits of training here and there, and you don't really realize it. So.
Well, if you think about it, I mean, isn't that the way that people are living now?
It is.
I mean, when you walk around at a mall, how many people are on their phones and walking into columns and tripping over things if you're still going to the malls? But just out in public, look at any of the cameras on YouTube that are in public places, and half the people are on their phones. And if that's how they've learned to communicate, and that's how they are now accepting information without even thinking about it, which before would have been conversation, right? Me talking to you, that's how we exchange information. Well, we still do that, but we also do these other things. So why not put together training and education that way? Put it in chunks, let people get to it when they get to it. It still ends up at the same place. You still get mastery. It's just a different way to look at it. And if people are used to receiving information in packets, why not give it to them in packets?
That makes perfect sense. There's 2 things in the chat that I wanted to bring up. Harley has said he recently used your ISD boot camp from your book to develop a presentation that was successful in garnering more trust. So thank you very much for that.
Oh, can you send me a copy? I'd love to see it. Please send me a copy.
There you go, Harley. And okay, here's another question. Speaking of being challenge ready, there are a lot of instructional design myths out there that are proliferated as truths. What myths have you seen, and what would you recommend as more effective methods?
Oh, the myths. Gosh, the biggest thing that I blow up about is learning styles. And learning styles, my friends, are useless. If you want to look at things that are useful, look at Gardner's multiple intelligences and how intelligence is gauged across a broad spectrum of different elements and not just certain things. Learning styles, there is no research to show that it works. There is research to show if you don't use what people think is their learning style. As I'm a visual learner, I'm a tactile learner, I'm whatever. What you find out is they actually learn better when they're challenged and when you're not using a particular learning style. So I know there's 50 people out there want to find me, tar and feather me, but I'm telling you, learning styles, don't waste your time with them. That is a big, the only time that you want to think about this is special needs groups, and absolutely. So if you have hearing impaired, vision impaired, whatever, of course. I mean, that's just common sense. You design to their ability to retain and view the information or hear the information. But just in general, this whole notion that I used to have taught to me back in the dark ages, chiseled on, stone tablets was, we're visual learners, we're auditory learners, we're tactile learners. And probably one of the best examples of that I can share with you is one of the things I put in one of the books. I don't remember at this point which one, but if you look at apprenticeship trades and you think, well, that's a tactile group. Everything has to be hands-on. Everything has to be, very, I need to touch it. I need to be part of it that way. And I can tell you in putting together apprenticeship programs for some of the major trades around the world, people that were in your house or in your condo doing work were part of these apprenticeships. And what we found is the more that you talk to them up Bloom's taxonomy and not just about demonstrating and other things, but okay, challenge me, tell me how to do these things. And what we found is that's how they have to do their work. I mean, there's no way you can talk to a brick or wire a house by lecturing to it. I mean, you have to do that tactily, and you obviously use the cognitive information you've stored and learned. But the other notion is here that these folks are really wanting to be challenged. They want to talk about other things. They want to talk about the impact of their work on society and how they can give up their time to make their neighborhoods and communities better and all these other things, which we now have evolved into some of these apprenticeship curriculum. So you can look at this and, okay, we need to go through this stuff. You need to know how to do these skills, but let's look at the broader issues in society. Let's look at the broader issues in your life and things that are important to you. And that comes from this whole notion of learning styles. Okay, you need to challenge people and not just make them comfortable. Because I can assure you, if you're a visual learner and you're going to look at slides, you're not going to remember half of them. Or if you're an auditory learner and you're listening to a book, how much of that are you going to really retain? Because that's what you're used to. It's what you're comfortable with. But if I force you out of that mold and get you to think about it in a different way, I think you're going to pay more attention. And that's what the research shows.
Yeah. And it looks like in the chat that you have, I want to say the majority who are at least posting in the chat are agreeing with you. So
Great.
So
I love it. Thank you, all of you. I will send you a Christmas present.
Okay, I'll get you some names. Send them a copy of your book. It'll be great.
Yeah, I'd love to. We can get
So
somebody
here's
to
the
buy it.
question. We have to convince, let's say we have an existing course, Learning Styles is in it. And so those of us who are working with it use it as a preference, and that as an instructional designer, you present it such that you address all of them as opposed to trying to target people.
Right.
So it makes you potentially a better designer. But if in fact it is a myth, how do we get it out of there? How do
Well,
we
see, that
convince
was
the course owner to
I can
let
remember.
go?
I can remember sitting through classes of how to design stuff. It was undergrad classes. I was provost at a university, and I would sit and observe instructors. They would go through the learning styles and the teaching techniques class, and say you should rotate each of the learning styles so that you have visual and auditory. And they go through all this, and I had to leave because I just couldn't. I wasn't somebody who's going to make them change what they did because that wasn't fair to them. That's how they believed and wanted to teach. But I think the rotation of learning styles confuses learners in some cases. Not always. I mean, there are ways you can do that are clever, but I'm not sure it gets you anywhere in terms of moving people to mastery and being able to demonstrate mastery. If you've designed something that works for you, it's fantastic. Go with it. Don't change it. But if you're having issues that are starting to pop up or popped up that make you suspicious, then try challenging in learners. Try putting them a little bit at ease. And I'm a big believer in not designing courses that people enjoy just to make them enjoy a course. I've never done that. I will never do that. And I've found the more that I challenge learners, the more they step up and they want to be part of this challenge. They want to get past whatever I challenge them with. And it's not always true when you get different levels, but I found with adults don't like to waste time. They want to feel like they got some skin in the game, that there's something here that they can learn and they can use. And I think the more I challenge them, whether it's a learning styles approach with, if they're comfortable just watching slides, and I'm not going to use slides. There you go, learner. Okay. Bring it on. We're gonna have conversations, darn it, and we're gonna work in groups, and we're gonna do different stuff. I'm not just gonna feed you visuals. 'Cause yeah, right. So if I lost any of the people that still support?
No, actually, there's an additional question. How
Okay.
and where are we challenging our learners in our instructional design? What are those challenges? How do we accomplish that? How do we, who have thought inside the box for so long, broaden our thoughts and what do those challenges look like? How do we work that in?
Well, I think it challenged learners. Of course, each population and content combination is different, and I can give you a broad brush of what I think a challenge would be for a learner. But I think, like we're having a conversation today, can you imagine if I would have just done 60 PowerPoint slides on the same content? How would I challenge you? How would I challenge you to have questions? How would I challenge you to have a discussion with me? And what I found in most non-technical areas, a little different with technical, I mean, obviously you have to play the game design-wise, but many times it's how you put together your methodology for how you're going to deliver your course. And the more I ask questions with an adult population, the more discussion I have, and the more I challenge them. And it gives me, as a facilitator and a designer, an opportunity to do that. So when I put together the textbook, I put in a lot of case studies because I want people to think. I want people to put their brand on something and state an opinion and be able to defend it. And I think that is one of the most powerful cognitive challenges that you can do is make people express an opinion, make them come up with an alternative to something you suggest. I used to have a thing in class. Every class I came up with a new word. I would come up with a word that didn't exist. And sometimes it was obvious, sometimes it was subtle. And I would wait for that first student to catch whatever word that was. So we kind of had a contest. And I would give like 5 extra points if a student could tell me at what point I used a word that didn't exist. And there's little techniques. You can do this online really cleverly by challenging people to read everything and putting something at the end of materials and say, congratulations, send me an email with this code on it, and I'm going to give you 2 extra points. And once they get into that, and you start to get them excited and challenged about things, but challenge is about letting them be who they are. Getting them to think, getting them to ask questions, getting them to express an opinion, getting them to provide alternative solutions to things that everybody thinks are already pretty much where they want them to be. So challenge them, ask them, talk to them.
Yeah. Yeah, if you relate that to Bloom's taxonomy, you're functioning at a higher cognitive level
You're all the way to the
just
right.
just
Go
from
to
the
the
start.
right.
Yeah.
Go to the
Yeah.
big column, the
Yeah,
big
you're
big
the top of
words.
the hill.
Top of the hill.
Okay.
That's how you do it. So, I mean, there's lots of other ways to do it, but that's my way as a designer to think about it is put stuff out there that they have to think about and answer and participate in.
Okay. Here's another question for your method. What is the list of practical instructional design models, such as Gagne's 9 events, that we could research into applying appropriately in certain situations? Do you have a list? Do you have favorites? Is it situational?
I fall back on Gagne because I think he provided the instructional design with the world with, I mean, him and Briggs and Mager and all the folks at Florida State, they moved this in the 40s during World War II to a science. And part of that science was how you sequence learning. And then you came up with program learning, which later became what we know as Gagne's 9 events. And um, when I was writing one of my first books, one of my students interviewed Mr. Dr. Gagne, and and I had rewritten. If you look at my books, I don't use the same wording that he does, especially for 5, 6, and 7. And the student read it to Dr. Gagne and said, "Chuck wants to know if you're okay with this." And
Wow.
And Dr. Gagne said, "Yeah, actually, I think it's kind of better. It's more modern in terms of looking at how this work looks." So if you look at my versions of it, it's application feedback 1, 2, and 3. This notion that you have to have 3 iterations of actually having a student demonstrate and giving them accurate feedback and doing all this in a safe environment. So I think there are derivatives of the 9 events that you can use anywhere. And there are certainly other approaches, but I think you always come back to this notion you have to set up the learning, you have to provide the learning, You let people practice it in a safe environment without that final evaluation, and then you give them a chance to demonstrate mastery. You can do that in 3 steps, you can do that in 4 steps, you can do it in 9 steps. But I think you have to fall back on those basics somewhere and think back. This is a science now. Again, let's look at how people learn. How do people learn? They take it in, they chew it up, they put it in short-term memory, it's reinforced. If you practice it 3 times, and this goes back to marketing too, the rule of threes and the rule of sevens in marketing is you have to see something 3 times to remember it, and you probably have to see it 7 times to buy it. And it's the same with learning. That's just basic cognitive function. If I practice something 3 times, I'm going to remember it. And if I remember it accurately because I've been given feedback, then I'm going to move it to long-term memory. That's just good, sound science of learning.
You're getting a lot of agreement in the chat to research learning theory and connect it to the model, and that the designers are using different models based on different projects and not just going through the steps, but actually thinking about it
Yeah.
and applying
Well,
it
you have
in the
to.
correct way. So,
I mean, what sense does it make to present a course if it's not the way people learn? I mean, it just makes no sense to me. And this goes back, as I say again and again, and I'll keep saying it. This is a science. There's a science to learning. It's pretty well established and documented and researched and shown countless times. People learn this way. Are there other ways to learn? Of course. Critical incident learning, where you just have such a traumatic event that something changes in you and you learn. But outside of that, the normal day to day of us going through school and learning a skill and doing other things we do, there's a way you do that.
okay. I'm going to ask you one of my own questions.
Oh, I don't know.
You and I have had conversations about how you come to ISD.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some primary ways. You can get it in school, and you can go through and take a degree and come out and be very versed in the underpinnings and the theory and that kind of stuff. You can fall into it accidentally because somebody asked you to create a training program and you had to figure out what that was. And then there's sort of the hybrid model. In our environment, in the laboratories and the folks who are attending this, we have a mix of those folks. So we have people who have formal education in it. We have people who've taken some 1-week courses in the ADDIE model, and we have other folks that have just come to it naturally. How do you have all of those people work together? Where's the sort of common ground? Because the languages are at different levels and about different things. We're talking about Gagne, like everybody knows who Gagne is.
Yeah. Most people call
So,
him Gagne,
yeah,
which used to make
or
him laugh.
Maker.
Yeah. Robert Gagne was quite a guy. I can't tell all the stories here, but he didn't care what you called him, believe me. So this notion of how do we take all these different levels of expertise and put them into a community of knowledge. And the thing that I always suggest is you build your community, put your community together, talk about these things. I've had sessions with new designers where all we did was talk about jargon. Okay, let's go through this silly stuff that instructional designers say that makes no sense to anybody. And I always make sure that there's this hand raising event in anything we do where if somebody jargonizes, we pull it out and we fix it and explain it. So my sense of this is just basic community building. Build this community of designers. Let's start with the notion that we all come from different places, and let's get together and talk about how we look at things. Let's look at how we look at objectives, how we look at mastery, how we look at evaluation, how we look at process, look at how we design courses, and in a larger sense, how we design programs. So course design is one small part of instructional design. You have all these other components. Whatever model you use, there's hundreds of models out there. ADDIE is just the one that people know the best. But even ADDIE, you don't follow it directly. It's just a foundational, theoretical place to start with this stuff. So as a manager, as someone who wants to build community, I'm going to get everybody together and we're going to go through and we're going to have this discussion about what all this stuff means. And don't let people freelance, because it's very easy to get something in your head and it's now the Rock of Gibraltar. It's actual fact, and it doesn't matter what anybody else says or does. I believe that to be truth. And as someone who's responsible for this function, responsible for these people's growth, I'm going to have that conversation. I want all of us to get together. And if it's not done organizationally, do it over lunch. the more experienced designers take the more novice designers and just have conversations about this. And I think that's how you do it. And eventually everybody will come along and you'll have some consensus about all of these things. And then somebody new will come in and start all over again. But yeah, that's what you do. But without that conversation, without that opportunity to build community, I think you wander all over the place.
Well, and I think you're absolutely right. And that's our experience of it, that when you find a champion, somebody who's a crusader that then understands instructional design as a learning science and what it actually brings to the table, and you bring all the folks together, you create that community of interest, and you have a regular contact there, then you can start to bring the managers and the clients and other folks and connect them to that, and it helps you, or it helps me, especially as a designer, to be able to explain what it is that I do, because like you, my family doesn't have a clue. There's just
5-minute warning.
and if they say, you do PowerPoints one more time, it's like, woo. So
Okay, this is perfect, right, Deborah? We have to be proud of what we do. We have to be darn proud of what we do as instructional designers and as subject matter experts. And the fact that people in general have no concept. I mean, if you do Google on ISD, it's always independent school districts. We have not evolved even in the Google algorithms. And I'm sure a lot of people come on a YouTube channel and think they're going to learn about a school district in Texas or something. And okay, well, maybe. But I think we just have to be proud about what we do. We have to tell people what we do. And just like someone who's a physicist doesn't have to explain to the family, the intricacies of what they do. They can just say, okay, generally this is what we do. We work with these things and this is what we produce and this is what comes out the other end. And I think we should be proud of that. It's a science. It's replicable. It's all the things that science is. We just, for some reason, are so humble about it that we've never tried to evolve and make it more visible. And I think a lot of that comes from many of us as designers are introverts and like to be the back channel person. And I'd rather be in the hall than in front of the auditorium. And it's always been the case for me. I'm an incredibly strong introvert. And even though I can do the things like this because it's part of what I do, it's not something I'm comfortable with. And I'll need to go take a nap when we're done. But, it's just the way people are, right? So if most designers are back channelers and don't want to be the center of attention and do the rest of it, then our field is going to kind of sit there and it's going to be guided by innuendo and half truth and stereotypical things that people come up with about us. So I think we have to be very outspoken about what we do, very proud of what we do, explain it to people, make them part of our family, however we can do that. But I think there's a lot of this, let's just stand up and be proud of what we do.
good advice and perfect timing. I think we have a couple of minutes left. I don't know if there are any other questions in the chat. And Bethany says, offer the Kool-Aid. So I guess we need some ISD Kool-Aid.
Recipe. Send me an email. I got one that works every time.
You're going to get more emails from this than you're possibly ready for.
Sure, they've got it. I love them. Bring it on.
Oh gosh.
And also, if people have ideas for the YouTube channel, let me explain the channel to you. It's not monetized. It's not a money-making venture. Denise and I are doing this out of our love for the field, trying to get visibility, trying to put some basic stuff out there for people. So if you have any ideas for people that you think we should interview, if you've got topics that you would like us to cover, please let us know either in the comments within YouTube or somewhere else. And don't get the idea that Chuck and Denise trying to make money, because I can assure you we've lost quite a bit just getting the equipment we needed to do this. So it's not monetized. We don't have Patreon or anything else going on. It's just our love of the field and trying to grow it. So meet us there, meet us in emails, wherever you would like, but be proud of what you do. Stand up for what you do. Tell people that you're proud of what you do. And let's let everybody know instructional design, ISD, subject matter experts, this whole wonderful world that we live in and work in is a great thing, and we're very proud of it. I know I'm very proud of it.
I think as are the rest of us. So Brody or Shane, back to you.
All right. Yay. Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Deborah. So much fun. This was an amazing conversation. Thank you, Chuck. We sure appreciate it. It's really neat to see the interaction. And I'm so glad to see that towards the end of the conference here, people getting into these conversations. Hey, I wanted to say thank you all, everyone, for joining us for this this 2-day event. It's kind of sad to see that it's done. Wow, it seemed to have gone really very fast. Thanks for the tears there, Chuck. I hope you all had a lot of fun, right? There's a lot of content, and like we said earlier, some of it is kind of pushing the envelope, what the art possible is, and some of it is, the down to the practicality. And I hope you found something useful during this time that we were together. And I hope you made some connections with some folks across the labs. We really are all in the same business. We're all in a very defined corner of the industry in the Department of Energy training world. We really should be rubbing shoulders a whole lot more than we have been, because there's a lot to be gained for it. So anyway, I wanted to say thank you all for attending. Thank you so much for our presenters, Chuck, and all of the others that put in their time and donated. We sure appreciate you sharing your expertise with us. I've learned a lot, and I sure hope that all of you have as well. And I wanted to thank our planning team too. They are the ones that put in the months of effort to put one of these together. And if you've ever been part of that, you know it's it's a bit of a challenge. So just to close things up, we have been recording all of these sessions. We'll put them up on the website early next week so that they should be available. We'll probably have them up for a few months. We've also been capturing the list of attendees for each session. So if you need help for getting credit for attending these, please reach out. Make use of that help tile on the website. Then we can get you that list so you can get some credit. And final thought right here before we all close out. In the words of mortal Miss Frizzle, let's take chances. Let's make mistakes. Let's get messy. Woohoo! Everybody have a great afternoon or evening wherever you at, and take care.